There are 3 keys to running an epic, memorable boss battle in Dungeons & Dragons. First, evoke strong emotions from your players. Second, designing the boss battle well, and finally, running the boss battle well. And points 2 and 3 help you achieve point 1. So today we're gonna take a deep dive into this so that your big bad's next big fight isn't a big, huge letdown for you and your players. But first, I wanna tell you about
Waystar,
a Kickstarter from Penny Dragon Games that is now live. If you like Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, but would like to play a sci-fi themed game,
Waystar
is your ticket. As a science fiction D&D 5e conversion, it uses rules you'll be familiar with and preserves the fast-paced nature of the 5e D20 system. Do you want to run a campaign with a Mass Effect feel, or maybe something more like Firefly? Well, with
Waystar,
you can. This Kickstarter contains everything you will need to run a truly epic science fiction campaign straight out of the gate. The core rulebook, the Creature Codex, the Triangulum Galaxy Setting Book, and Steal the Stars, an action-packed heist adventure. Back the
Waystar
Kickstarter at the link below. Number 1, evoking strong emotions. Hope, hopelessness, desperation, joy, jubilation, disappointment. These are all the different types of emotions that you want to make your players feel over the course of a boss fight. One of the mechanics that's going to help you accomplish this is the classic narrative structure, where you have a rising action, a climax, and a falling action. For instance, during the rising action of a campaign or an adventure, you can use foreshadowing. This is the lead up to the fight during the adventure or the campaign. For instance, in my Sword Coast Guard game, I used Lord Paxton as our big bad boss at the end of the campaign. And constantly, over the course of the campaign, the players were constantly hearing about Lord Paxton. Lord Paxton this, Lord Paxton's doing that, Lord Paxton has another vassal, Lord Paxton is threatening Waterdeep. And this foreshadowing, this constant mentioning, this lead up to what presumably would be a future confrontation with Lord Paxton created this mystery, this anticipation. Who is Lord Paxton? How is this gonna go? What is he? When are we gonna fight him? And where are we gonna fight him? This is the suspense. This is the drama that you are trying to achieve in your games. And once they get to that boss fight, once they're in the depths of it, it has begun, initiative has been rolled, and blows are being traded. You want to try to accomplish a thing. You want it to seem, as the fight gets going, that victory might be impossible. This is the rising action during the fight itself. As things kick off, the players are all wondering and looking around at each other and saying, dang, this is a nasty fight. We're taking lots of damage, and the bad guys don't even look that beat up, and oh no, more bad guys just got here. Oh dear, this doesn't look good. Can we win? Should we run away? Is this going to be a TPK? If you can get your players thinking that way as a fight ramps up, that's going to evoke some very strong emotions and make that even more interesting, dynamic, and intriguing for your players. They might also be freaking out, like, oh my gosh, we're gonna die, run away! But if they're doing that, then you know you have them. You have their interest. This combat isn't some run-of-the-mill smash down that's a foregone conclusion that the heroes are going to win, but something is actually on the line. Something actually matters, and they are hooked. Now, we as game masters know that in most situations, victory isn't impossible. In fact, the game is designed for them to win. So how do we accomplish this feeling while also managing things behind the screen so that they aren't always going to lose on TPK? Using your description and narrative just right, both before the boss battle and setting it up and making it seem like this Lord Paxton is some invincible threat. And then also using narration and description during the boss battle will help keep this feeling going. One of the classic things that I love to do during my boss fights is just casually mention after the barbarian unloads and does 75 points of damage that, oh yeah, they looked mildly, just a few cuts and bruises, not a big deal. And the players are like, oh crap, he just unloaded and it barely did anything to them. And they're all like, whoa, not good. That's narration, that's description right there doing its work. PCs becoming heavily wounded, even dropping to 0 hit points. That's another example of something that's going to get them biting their fingernails and wondering, is this impossible? And of course, they'll freak out about that, but behind the scenes, Dungeon Masters, we all know that dropping to 0 hit points in 5th edition is pretty meaningless and trivial, and they're probably gonna be okay. What you really ideally want to accomplish as well during your boss battle to really get emotions high is to have the tide of battle swing back and forth. Sometimes the heroes are winning, and then the big bad has a comeback and starts to take the edge, and it's not looking good for them. But then there's a pivotal moment where it starts to look really good for the heroes, and they might actually win, only to have it reverse. This is something that I've observed in some of my very best boss battles that happens. Unfortunately, I can't really give you a tip or a way or a mechanism to make it happen. If it exists, I would love for someone to share it with us, because I have noticed that when a battle does that, goes back and forth, it is way more interesting and way more awesome for everybody at the game table. I just don't know exactly how to replicate it. Sometimes you get lucky, I guess. And if you finally have the heroes win, but it's barely a win, they almost all lost, and they eke out a victory, that is when there's jubilation at the game table. That is when they shout and they cheer and they're like, whoa, geez, man, I'm glad that's over and holy crap, we won. A hard-won victory is a victory that you cherish. And this correlates to the climax, of course. You have the lead up where things are going back and forth. This is the rising action. This is when things don't seem like they're going to work out. And then there's the climax, the final thing where you're all gonna, no, we didn't die, the boss went down, holy crap, that was amazing. And then the cleanup. The looting afterwards, the jubilation, the relaxation, that is the falling action of our classic, what do you call that thing? Graph? Woo, yeah. Now, if we were writing a story, if we were writing a book, it would be amazingly easy to have all of this happen. We just write it that way. We just decide that this is what happens in the final boss battle. But we're not writing a story, we're running a game. Yes, a story does result from what happens at the game table. A story does result based upon dice rolls and decisions that folks make. But we're playing a game first, and together, through our actions and decisions, a story is created. But it is not determined in advance. This is what makes it difficult. Now, one way to get a boss battle to go the way that I described it previously is changing things on the fly during the battle. In other words, curating the game experience for your players. That is one option. I personally don't like that option anymore. I would rather run things straight and let things lie as they lie. But it is something that you could do. And there's nothing wrong with it, in my opinion. And I will say too that with experience, you get better at designing boss fights to achieve this without changing things on the fly. Admittedly, this is hard to design and achieve the way that I described a boss battle going. That makes it really emotive and awesome. But they are features of an awesome, memorable boss fight. And our next 2 points I'm about to make are much easier for you to actually implement at the game table. They're actionable, concrete things. Number 2, designing the boss battle. The first thing is that a boss battle must be more than just a hit point slog. If all your boss is a big sack of hit points that the characters gather around and start beating down, and the boss deals damage and the characters do damage, and they just sit there and all they're doing is whack, 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 take some damage, oh, he's getting close to being dead, oh no, he hit us for damage. If that's all it is a hit point slog, that is the world's lamest boss battle. So make it more than that. Have interesting environment. For instance, I once ran a boss battle with Tiamat, and she had 5 heads, 1 representing each of the chromatic dragon colors. And every single round of combat, the terrain around them changed. In one moment, they were in a volcano that was erupting and spewing lava and molten rock all over the place. Which are actually the same thing. Lava is molten rock. Okay, yeah, thank you. And then they would shift to a swamp where she would dive underneath the water and come up and attack them. And then they would shift into a desert environment with sand dunes and other hazards. And along the lines of having good bosses that aren't just sacks of hit points that inflict damage, is that you want them to be able to inflict conditions on the characters as well. Being paralyzed, being stunned, being knocked prone, being incapacitated, maybe they get poisoned. Bosses that can cast cool spells are also very nice, because cool spells do cool things, which makes fights more interesting usually. And bosses that have interesting abilities as well, because spells can be counterspelled, and they usually are, but interesting abilities that do spell-like effects can't be countered, can they? Lair actions. Your boss needs lair actions. Even at low levels, give them something they could do. And this should probably be something that has to do with affecting their environment. For instance, They're fighting against the Warlock, and on initiative count 20, their Lair action triggers, and tentacles burst up in a 10-foot square and try to grapple and squeeze anybody there. Bosses should also have legendary actions. This is going to help them keep up with action economy in the game. Now, a lot of low-level bosses that are in the core books don't have legendary actions. There are even some high-level bosses that were recently released that don't have legendary actions. And that is lame. The boss needs legendary actions. They need something they can do in between getting beat on and having the crap knocked out of them by the characters. And one of my big recommendations for legendary actions is adding movement. Any core monster that already has legendary actions, if one of them isn't movement of some sort, I will always add movement as a legendary action. Mobility and positioning on the battlefield is key when you are running a tactical combat. Along that line, legendary resistances are also pretty darn important for bosses. It sucks if your hag, main villain, gets something cast on her that just paralyzes her, and then she just sits there and everything's a critical hit and she's dead in one round. Boom, big bad boss, done. Why? Because there was a spell cast, she's paralyzed, and she had no legendary resistances. So when I have a boss in a fight, guess what? They almost always have at least one legendary resistance, if not 3. You can also do cool things like having phases to your bosses. In other words, it's not a static boss that is unchanged, but things happen to it. It powers up perhaps and changes as the fight progresses. I once had a massive Ankheg boss that when it got reduced to 50% of its original hit points, it released some chemical juices that sped it up and supercharged it, and it did twice as many attacks and breathed out twice as much acid. That was nasty. They didn't like fighting that. Now, if you're enjoying this video and think the information doesn't completely suck, give me a thumbs up and leave a comment for the algorithm down below. Let YouTube know that there is still hope for me, even though I never ask you to subscribe or click the stupid bell. I mean, it's a bell that doesn't ring. Why would you click it? Next, minions and reinforcements. Holy crap. What is a boss fight without minions? It's a boss that you just surround and pound into oblivion in a couple rounds. Or reinforcements that arrive. On initiative count 20, it's minions streaming through the doors, coming in to assist it against these plucky adventurers that are attacking it. I mean, who would design a final boss fight without minions? Again, somebody's gonna be like, Luke, didn't they just release an adventure with Vecna? It didn't have any minions, and Vecna doesn't have any legendary actions. Isn't that the gold standard of how to— No! Maybe you can do something like having puzzles during combat. A puzzle that you could solve while you are fighting the boss that weakens the boss, or even makes it possible to do damage to the boss. Recently in a game, I had a puzzle during a combat, and as the longer the puzzle was unsolved, more and more monsters kept on spawning, and my players were freaking out. And eventually, around round 3 or so, they actually tried to start solving the puzzle. They probably could have made that fight easier if they would have not ignored the puzzle for most of the first part of the combat. You can have time constraints during your boss fights. Perhaps, for instance, there are villagers tied to the walls, and as the characters are fighting that necromancer, the necromancer is using its magic to sacrifice villagers, leeching their hit points out of them, thus killing them, of course, and making the necromancer even stronger. Now, if you're going to have high stakes in a boss battle and things are going to be rough, there should also be high rewards. Have there be an awesome treasure hoard, some cool magic items, some cool crap that your characters can get from having defeated that boss. A boss without anything on their dead corpse is a poor boss indeed. By the way, I do have a couple older videos on my channel that delve even deeper into specifics for making awesome boss battles. How to make the perfect boss fight part 1 and part 2. I'll leave links below if you'd like to check them out once this video is over. Number 3, running the boss battle. So we've talked about evoking emotions, and we've talked about how to design the boss battle, but it's also important how you run the boss battle. Once you're at the game table, how you implement what you were designing and planning. One of the things, the very first things I recommend for any good boss battle is dialogue and social interaction before the fight begins. This could be the boss congratulating them in a mocking tone, taunting them, or just monologuing a little bit, doing a little information dump because, hey, I'm gonna kill you anyway. And it's a little cliched, but it helps to give some plot points and progress things along. But that conversation should continue during the fight, because you know as well as I do that one of your players is gonna get bored of that crap and he's gonna start attacking. He's gonna cast Eldritch Blast or Fireball, and combat is going to be joined. But that doesn't mean that the conversation ends. It doesn't mean that your boss stops talking to them. On their turn, they might shout things at the players might respond to them. There might be a running dialogue as they fight and trade blows. This combines the benefits of a combat with a social interaction all in the same encounter. As a dungeon master, do not neglect your narration during the battle. Describe what is happening. Describe as the boss rushes forward, sword held high, and sweeps with a sneer of rage across his face. As he takes a blow, he cringes and grunts a little bit and looks with rage at the character that dared harm him. Let your players narrate some stuff as well. When an enemy dies, when a minion goes down, when they take a grievous wound. It doesn't have to be just you that's narrating and describing things. Next, have your boss fight to win. Use their abilities to their fullest. Have them be nasty. Have them do certain things that you probably would consider unfair. If the cleric casts Healing Word a couple times and gets people back up from zero, guess what? The cleric has now become the primary target. Can't have that happening anymore now, can we? If your big bad boss is intelligent and crafty and has tactics and isn't a complete moron, then he's going to do things like that because he wants to win. He doesn't want to lose. Who wants to lose? Next, know the boss's abilities and keep the pace up. When you don't know what your monster can do and you have to look things up and refer and think a whole lot, when it's your turn to take your turn, dear dungeon master, that bogs the game down. Oftentimes we'll get upset when players bog the game down because they can't make up their minds, but we dungeon masters can be just as guilty of that as well. So read your monster in advance and prepare tactics that you think you're going to use. If you're gonna run a spellcaster, think through your spells and plan out which ones you might use in advance. Control pacing. We want fast action, quick turns. We don't want players waiting forever and getting bored. As you're running that boss battle, keep in mind the classic narrative structure, the rising action, the climax, and the falling action. Those things you planned and designed beforehand, try to keep them in mind too, so that maybe, just potentially, you can influence things just a little bit in your boss fight so they can follow that pattern, because it will make it far more fulfilling and interesting if you can. Remember, Dungeon Master, you are playing a game, you are running a game, you are adjudicating rules, but you are also the hand of entertainment at the game table. You are also trying to influence things so that they will have maximum fun for both you and your players. Now, if you want to learn more about running epic boss battles, I put together a short playlist right here for you. And you can also click right here to become a DM Lair patron and get a new issue of Lair magazine every month. It contains 5e adventures, new monsters, puzzles, and other DM resources to help you reduce your prep time, but still run awesome games.